10 years trapped on an island of alien women who hate humans. Now The first rule I learned on the island was silence. The second was to never turn my back on the surf, because the sea here had moods like a god and teeth like broken glass. On the 10th anniversary of the crash, judged by the tally notches on a driftwood spar, I still woke to the same sound, the thundering green of waves slamming the obsidian reef and the low hiss of sand pulled back like breath through teeth. The women called it a veer. Their word for the island sounded like wind through a shell. The first time I heard it, I was hogtied on a beach of crushed pearl, sun burning my skin until I smelled like cooked fish. A ring of women stood around me with spears of bone and resin, their hair braided with tiny shells that clicked when they moved. Their leader later told me her name, Kethra. Her gaze was a blade. "Human," she said in a language I would not understand for months, then raised the spear above my heart. Sera stopped her. The smallest among them, shy-eyed and scarred along one cheek. She knelt, touched my wrist like I was a scorpion, and spoke a single steady word. Even in ignorance I heard its weight. Later, they staked me in the shallows so the tide would argue with my ankles. Later they gave me a bucket and a patch of scrub to prove I knew how to harvest water from air. Later, when I learned enough of their language to answer more than yes or no, I learned why they hated me before they ever knew my name. Men like me had come before. Bright sails, bright smiles, bright knives. They took daughters. They took coral metal. They took and did not leave graves. Kethra had lost a sister to those ships. Sera had lost a husband to their hunger. They kept me alive to learn if I was one of those men, and then, perhaps, to use me. Silence and hard work bought me small mercies. Shade at noon, unbound wrists at night, a spear with blunt tip for fishing. Years turned, and I became a strange part of their days. I cut boats from driftwood with a shell saw. I taught them knots that held in the teeth of a storm. Sera taught me to pull salt from seawater with coals and palm leaves and patience. We barely spoke at first, then spoke through the things of our hands, and at last with words that made us both angry and both alive. I learned to listen to their grief, to their songs for those the sea had kept. I kept my own grief tucked beneath my ribs like a broken compass. My brother, my mother, my little apartment with the window fan that sounded like a mosquito the size of a dog. Years sanded that grief smooth but never hollow. On the morning everything changed. The sea went silent. I was mending a net with Sera when the waves flattened as if a giant hand pressed them down. The women stopped moving. Even the clicking shells in their braids seemed to listen. Out past the reef, a bruise-colored line thickened on the horizon. Birds rose from the mangrove in a black ribbon and fled inland. Kethra stepped onto the black rock shelf and raised her spear toward the bruise like she could stab the sky. "Skytide," Sera whispered. Her voice had the thinness of fear. "Once in many years. Toravir before. It will eat the reef." "What do you do?" "Yes. We lash. We sing. We pray." Sera's eyes found mine. "But we cannot move the island." My eyes drifted to the ancient beacon tower at the island's crown, a white bone snapped long ago by storm or spite. A previous people had built it in another age. I had climbed it my second year here and found its guts rusted and sleeping. Mirrored dish, sealed cells, a cradle for a transmitter I could never power. Thought rose dangerous, bright. My ship's emergency cell, buried where I'd hidden all human things. Maps watched the little knife beyond the salt caves. 10 years ago, I had left it there because Kethra would have burned me for it. 10 years ago, I had promised myself never to try to signal those who had cut her heart. But the bruise on the horizon widened, and the reef groaned like a timber ship. "I can wake the tower," I said. Kethra turned sharply. You would call your kind. I would call anyone, I said. Even enemies throw ropes at a drowning hand. Her nostrils flared. If any human sails within sight of a veer, we will boil your bones. Sera's hand found the back of my arm, a gentle anchor. Let him try, she said. If he lies, we carve truth out of him later. Kethra's lip curled, and then her eyes slid toward that black horizon and the dying waves. Go, she spat. If you do not return by the second bell, I will not leave anything for the birds. Ran. The salt caves breathed cold. I found the little grave I'd dug beneath the tangle of pinkroot and split it with my hands. The emergency cell sat there like a sleeping heart. My fingers shook as I cleaned barnacles from the connector and whispered a prayer to a god I didn't believe in. When I burst back into the light, the women were already lashing boats, hauling children to the high terraces. The bruise had become a wall, a traveling cliff of black water eating the edge of the world. Sera ran with me up the spiral path to the beacon. At the crown, the dish still waited, claws rusted. I stripped wire with my teeth. Bled. I cursed in the language of Avir and in the one my mother taught me, which felt like salt on a wound. Sera held the cell while I bridged contacts with a fishbone and a strip of copper hammered flat. There was a smell like spring rain on hot iron. The dish twitched. The tower hummed a note that made my teeth ache. Now, Sera breathed. I triggered a sweep. A general distress, coded in the old language of machines. No flag. No name. Just coordinates and a single word. Help. The Skytide came with the voice of mountains collapsing. It reared over the reef and clawed for the island, and then, far out, a second sound answered. Low. Growing. I staggered to the parapet and squinted through white spray. Airships. Not sails. Not the bright knives. Massive hulls like whales stitched with light, floating on contained thunder. The wall struck the outer reefs and tried to climb. The airships came to a stop above the break and pointed their throats at the sea. A bass roar like a choir of volcanoes shuddered the towers as the ships sang heat into the water. Steam rose like a curtain. The wall shivered. It broke itself on vapor and wind and fell in shattered shoulders that our island could hold. We did not cheer right away. We listened. We waited. We lived. Kethra climbed to the beacon and looked from the white ships to me with an expression I had never seen on her face, a mixture of fury and a respect that looked like grief shedding its armor. You called them, she said. I called anyone, I answered. They answered. One of the ships sent a smaller craft, a flower of light that descended to hover above the terrace. A voice rolled from it, the universal of traders. Unknown survivors identify. Kethra lifted her spear and did not answer. The women behind her lifted their spears and did not answer. Sera looked at me. In that pause, the 10 years weighed what I was. I could say my name and be saved. I could leave Avir, leave the women who had made my hatred a language and then taught me another. My name is no one, I said in the trade tongue. Leave water. Leave medicine. Leave the sea alone. A silence as soft as ash fell. Then the flower of light nodded, as if a machine could bow. Crate dropped on shock cords. The ships, big as forgiveness, turned away. Kethra's shoulders loosened, only a little. She touched the crate with the toe of her sandal, then looked past me to Sera. You were right, she said like the words hurt her teeth. Later has come. That night we ate bread made from stormroot and fish, and the children smeared ash lines on my face the way they did for heroes in their stories. Sera sat beside me, her shoulder pressed to mine like a vow spoken without words. What do they call you now? I asked her, half smiling. She tilted her head, braids clicking. We call you Avirborn, she said. If you accept it. I thought of my mother's window fan and my brother's laugh, and of the tower's hum, and of a wall of water that did not take us. The sea breathed. The island sang with insects and far drums. I took Sera's hand. I took the ash and drew a line across my own brow. I do, I said. 10 years trapped on an island of alien women who hated humans. Now they call me one of their own. And in the morning, when the surf resumed its endless argument with the reef, I listened, not as a prisoner mapping escape, but as a man learning the language of his home.